June 1942. A weapons factory in the American Midwest turns over its first production line. The date marks the birth of a rifle so light, so modest in appearance, that Japanese military intelligence would spend years trying to understand how such a simple-looking tool could reshape the entire balance of power in the Pacific. This is the story of the M1 Carbine, a weapon born from American practicality that would become a symbol of something Japanese strategists could never quite grasp: the relentless, unstoppable abundance of a free nation at war. To understand the shock this rifle would deliver, we must first enter the minds of those who faced it. The Japanese Imperial Officer Corps had constructed an entire ideology around the superiority of the warrior spirit. In their doctrine, discipline and honor transcended material wealth. A soldier properly trained, properly motivated, could overcome numerical disadvantage. The samurai legacy lived on, they believed, in every rifleman who carried the Type 38 Arisaka rifle. This was no mere weapon. It was a symbol of national character, of the unbreakable will that had sustained the empire for centuries. The Type 38 was a precision instrument, a bolt-action rifle of outstanding quality, with a receiver so finely engineered that American post-war inspectors would marvel at its strength. At 50.5 inches long with a bayonet, it stretched nearly 6 feet, turning every soldier into a warrior of geometric perfection. Weight, efficiency, the old industrial world captured in steel and wood, and then came the M1 Carbine. On its surface, it appeared almost insulting. Light, barely 5 pounds. Short, a mere 35 inches. Its ammunition was weaker than the standard M1 Garand rifle. Its range was shorter. To the trained eye of a military engineer from a nation that had built its identity on precision and craft, the M1 Carbine looked like something a farmer might carry to guard chickens, not a rifle worthy of global empire. Initial Japanese assessments when they first encountered the weapon in the Pacific Islands in 1943 were dismissive. Reports filtered back to Tokyo describing the carbine as exactly what its physical presence suggested: a weapon for rear echelon troops, a compromise born from American mass production rather than American quality. They arm even their cooks and truck drivers with rifles, Japanese commanders noted, almost incredulous. The logic was clear to them. If America had to equip non-combat personnel with firearms, it meant American manpower was inefficient, that the nation lacked the military discipline required for true warfare. This observation would prove to be one of the war's most catastrophic misreadings. What Japanese strategists failed to grasp was a truth that would unfold across 1,000 Pacific islands. American abundance was not weakness. It was warfare reimagined. The M1 Carbine entered production in June 1942. Born from a simple military specification, the United States needed something lighter and more compact than the M1 Garand rifle for troops who would not serve in frontline rifle squads, ordnance personnel, truck drivers, junior officers, engineers, and medics. By standard military logic, these troops received less capable weapons because they faced less demanding combat. But the American system, unlike any the world had yet seen, possessed the capacity to manufacture something revolutionary. It could mass-produce a weapon of genuine quality to arm even these second-line troops. In its simplicity lay a radical truth about industrial democracy. In America, abundance was not reserved for the elite. It was distributed downward, forward, and outward. Every soldier received the benefit of industrial might, not as an exception but as the norm. The numbers tell the story with mathematical certainty. Between June 1942 and August 1945, just 38 months, 9 separate American manufacturers established production lines and manufactured 6,221,220 carbines. Inland manufacturing alone produced 2,632,097 units, 43% of the entire production run. Winchester added 828,000. Underwood Elliott Fisher produced 545,000. IBM, the calculating machine company, manufactured 346,500 carbines. The rhythm of production accelerated through 1943 and 1944, reaching peaks of monthly output that would have seemed fictional in any nation but America. Contracts were written in spring, factories tooled up in summer, and by autumn the weapons flowed in continental streams. Japan, watching from the Pacific Islands, confronted a phenomenon that defied their strategic calculations: inexhaustible supply. The Type 38 Arisaka rifle represented Japanese manufacturing excellence. It was produced slowly, carefully, by a nation that valued precision. Total Japanese production of the Type 38 and its variants across the entire war years numbered approximately 3.8 million units in 3 years. By contrast, America produced more than 6 million carbines in just 38 months, while simultaneously manufacturing the M1 Garand rifle, the M1A1 carbine with its folding stock for paratroopers, ammunition in incalculable quantities, and every other implement of mechanized warfare. When Japanese officers attempted to calculate American capacity, the numbers appeared to mock their assumptions about the possible limits of industrial output. They calculated that America was devoting only 33% of its economic output to the Pacific theater, while Japan mobilized 55% of its entire economic capacity. Yet American GDP in 1944 was 6.4 times larger than Japan's. Devoting 1/3 of a vastly larger economy produced devastation the Japanese expected to inflict. With their entire industrial might, the M1 Carbine became a symbol and then a weapon of this catastrophic disparity. By 1944, M1 carbines were no longer issued exclusively to rear echelon troops. As combat demands intensified, as island after island fell to American forces, the carbine migrated forward into the hands of frontline soldiers. Officers, squad leaders, and combat infantrymen began carrying them. The decision reflected not a shortage of better weapons, but a recognition that the carbine, though lighter and carrying a shorter range round, was effective at the distances where most Pacific combat actually occurred. Studies would later confirm that the majority of combat exchanges in the dense jungle terrain happened within 200 to 250 yards, well within the carbine's 300-yard effective range. But more importantly, the carbine's magazine held 15 rounds instead of 8. In the ferocious, fast-paced firefights of island warfare, that extra ammunition capacity mattered. It meant American troops could deliver sustained fire without pausing to reload, a tactical advantage that Japanese soldiers, accustomed to the slow bolt-action rifle, could scarcely comprehend. Japanese soldiers who survived engagements with American carbine units reported a quality of fire that seemed inhuman. The bolt-action rifle required a soldier to work the action after each shot, a 1-second cycle repeated endlessly. The M1 carbine was semi-automatic. Point, squeeze, fire, point, squeeze, fire. The rhythm never broke. An American soldier with a carbine could produce 3 or 4 times the sustained firepower of a Japanese rifleman with a Arisaka. In the claustrophobic fighting of jungle warfare, in the desperate assaults on fortified positions, in the desperate nighttime infiltration attempts that characterized Japanese tactics, this difference meant the margin between survival and annihilation. The psychological impact transcended mathematics. Japanese soldiers who had been trained their entire military lives that American soldiers were soft, individualistic, incapable of withstanding hardship, confronted instead men armed with such profligacy of weapons that the nation could afford to arm support troops like combat soldiers. They did not simply face an enemy with superior firepower. They confronted a nation that could arm millions with rifle-grade weapons and send them across the Pacific in an endless stream. The Type 38 represented the best Japan could do. The M1 carbine represented what America could afford to distribute as standard equipment to anyone who might need a weapon. It was not the superiority of the individual weapon that shattered Japanese confidence. It was the realization that this weapon existed in quantities that made it disposable. Combat records from Pacific theater operations document the transformation in firepower mathematics. At Guam in 1944, Marines armed with M1 rifles and carbines established defensive perimeters that Japanese assault waves could not penetrate. The operational report from the U.S. The 3 Amphibious Corps noted that divisions, equipped with carbines, suffered disproportionately higher casualties than units that had retained the heavier M1 Garand rifles, not because the carbine was inadequate to the task, but because the mixing of weapons created command and control complications. Yet even with these complications, American forces armed with carbines delivered casualty ratios that defied Japanese calculations. Where Japanese losses ran to thousands, American casualties mounted in hundreds. The underlying mathematics was simple: sustained firepower from rifles that did not require bolt manipulation delivered by soldiers equipped with magazines holding 15 rounds. Overwhelmed tactics designed for single-shot precision fire. In the Philippines in 1945, American soldiers advancing through jungle terrain with carbines encountered Japanese soldiers still carrying bolt-action rifles. The difference was not one of quality but of philosophy. The Japanese rifle was an instrument of precision, of controlled fire, of individual marksmanship. The American carbine was an instrument of volume, of sustained output, of industrial firepower. When Japanese soldiers attempted to engage American carbine units in their normal tactical manner, carefully aimed shots, rationed ammunition, deliberate fire discipline, they discovered that American soldiers could respond with fire so continuous that return fire became impossible. Japanese survivors reported the shock of encountering American squads that seemed to fire without pause, where every soldier contributed to a wall of bullets, rather than individual marksmen taking individual shots. A recurring image in Japanese accounts of Pacific combat describes the psychological dissonance of hearing American gunfire. The sound was different. The Type 38 Arisaka produced a distinctive crack, isolated, controlled, with measured pauses as the bolt cycled. American rifle fire, especially from carbines concentrated in a squad or section, produced a roar. Continuous, overwhelming, unceasing. Japanese soldiers reported that the sound itself was demoralizing, because it meant there was nowhere to wait out the assault, no moment of comparative safety while American soldiers reloaded their weapons. The psychological element mattered because it translated into tactical reality. Soldiers who believed they were under fire from an inexhaustible source of bullets fought differently than soldiers facing contained, rationed opposition. Fear became physics. Physics became casualty ratios. Casualty ratios became strategic reality. The M1 Carbine in the hands of millions represented something that transcended military technology. It was a physical manifestation of American economic power, of the nation's ability to arm millions and still have millions more ready for deployment. Japan had conquered a vast empire in Asia. It could position soldiers across the Pacific, but it could not match the sheer materiality of American abundance. For every Japanese soldier killed with a carbine round, another American appeared carrying the same weapon, with the same thousands of rounds of ammunition. It was not a race Japan could win because it was not truly a race. It was an asymmetry that could only end in one direction. Japanese military attachés analyzed the carbine with technical precision. They noted its lighter ammunition, its shorter effective range, the ballistic characteristics of the .30 carbine round. All of these observations were accurate. The .30 carbine cartridge produced significantly less recoil than the .30-06 round, fired by the M1 Garand rifle. The cartridge contained less explosive energy. A bullet from the carbine penetrated less deeply into wood or earth than a Garand round. On paper, the analysis seemed to indicate that the carbine was objectively inferior, yet the very characteristics that made it inferior in terms of raw power made it superior in terms of rapid fire volume and magazine capacity. 9 contractors, starting from scratch, built facilities that did not exist in 1942 and that began producing carbines at scales of tens of thousands per month by 1943. The factories themselves became weaponry. The machines that manufactured the carbines were as much a weapon system as the weapons themselves. What the Japanese could not comprehend was that American industrial democracy had solved a problem that had plagued every previous military power: how to maximize quantity without sacrificing reasonable quality. The M1 Carbine was not the highest quality rifle ever manufactured. It was good enough, light enough, fast to produce, simple to manufacture, and entirely adequate to the task of killing enemies at the ranges where actual combat occurred. It was designed for economy of production. It achieved that goal, and then it was produced in quantities that astonished everyone. By 1944, the symbolic significance of the M1 Carbine had transformed. It was no longer merely a weapon issued to rear echelon troops. It was the embodiment of American abundance in a soldier's hands. It represented a nation so wealthy, so industrially powerful, that it could arm millions of ordinary soldiers with genuine military rifles and still have resources to spare. Japanese soldiers who captured carbines, and they did in small numbers, studying them with intense focus, reported back on the weapon's characteristics, its materials, its manufacturing methods. Japanese engineers attempted to understand how so many could be produced so quickly. The answer ultimately was not technological mystery, but industrial philosophy. America had decided that every soldier deserved a rifle. America had the capacity to make that decision a material reality. No other nation possessed both the will and the capability to do so. The M1 Carbine's production run of more than 6 million units was itself a statement of ideology. Each carbine represented a commitment. We will arm millions. We will send them across oceans to fight. We will supply them with ammunition in such quantities that they never calculate conservation. We will arm truck drivers and medics and clerks because we can. We will arm every soldier who might need a weapon because abundance is now our strategy. For a military culture that had built its identity on precision, restraint, and the spiritual superiority of the warrior, the sight of American soldiers casually throwing away damaged carbines and receiving new ones, reports note that many carbines were discarded rather than repaired, represented not just tactical disadvantage but metaphysical defeat. If weapons could be treated as expendable, what did that suggest about a nation's true power? Japanese soldiers at Iwo Jima in February 1945 faced the M1 Carbine and other American weapons in their fully mature deployment. By then, the production system had been refined. American squads operated with multiple weapons providing layered firepower. Where a Japanese squad relied on a few riflemen and a light machine gun, American squads carried M1 Garand rifles, carbines, and automatic weapons in combinations that created overlapping fields of fire. The mathematics of combat had shifted from individual marksmanship to suppressive firepower and maneuver. The Japanese soldier with the Type 38 Arisaka, no matter how skilled, faced an American system where quantity and sustained firepower overrode the advantages of precision and training. Captured Japanese officers and soldiers, when interrogated after the war, consistently identified American firepower superiority as the decisive factor in their defeats. They noted that the M1 Garand rifle had surprised them with its semi-automatic capability. They noted the tremendous volume of supporting fire from light and heavy machine guns. They noted the abundance of artillery and ammunition. But they also noted the carbines, the simple, light, seemingly modest rifles that armed millions of American soldiers. One Japanese general's post-war testimony summarized the strategic reality. We believed we would prevail because our soldiers were better trained, better motivated, and willing to die for the empire. We did not believe that a nation could arm millions of ordinary soldiers with rifles of quality and still have resources for everything else. We were wrong about what determined victory. The M1 Carbine, in its simplicity, represented a revolutionary truth about modern warfare. It was not the most powerful weapon. It was not the most precise. It was the weapon that could be produced in the greatest quantity by an industrial system operating at full capacity, and it was distributed with a logic that would have seemed absurd to any previous military culture. Arm everyone. Supply everyone with ammunition in abundance. Trust that volume and distribution would overcome any disadvantage in individual weapon quality. It was democracy's logic applied to warfare. Not the best weapon for the elite, the adequate weapon for the millions. By war's end, the M1 Carbine and its variants had fired countless hundreds of millions of rounds across the Pacific theater. Japanese soldiers fell to carbine fire. American soldiers carrying carbines walked off island after island, still armed, still supplied, still advancing. The carbine's magazine would eject with a metallic ring, and the soldier would reload and advance. There was always another magazine. There was always another round. There was always another soldier with another carbine. The supply chain that stretched from factories in Michigan and Indiana back to Pacific beachheads never broke. It never faltered. It grew stronger as the war progressed. Japanese military doctrine held that the decisive moment in warfare was the instant of personal combat, when warrior spirit and individual skill determined survival. American doctrine, as embodied in the M1 Carbine and its distribution, held that the decisive moment was the cumulative effect of thousands of soldiers delivering sustained fire from weapons of adequate quality, manufactured in inexhaustible quantity. These philosophies could not coexist. One had to prevail. And as Japanese soldiers faced American squads armed with carbines, firing without pause, reloading endlessly, advancing with confidence born from the knowledge that ammunition and replacement weapons were waiting, they confronted the ultimate defeat. the discovery that material abundance could override warrior spirit, that industrial democracy could defeat military hierarchy, that the rifle every truck driver carried represented a nation so wealthy and powerful that it could afford to equip its entire army with weapons and still have millions more in reserve. The M1 Carbine, dismissed by Japanese observers as a farmer's rifle, a weapon unworthy of elite soldiers, became in the hands of millions the physical embodiment of American industrial power and democratic ideology. It was not distinguished by its technical superiority, but by its ordinariness. A weapon simple enough to manufacture by the millions, effective enough to win battles, adequate enough to be distributed with a generosity that previous military cultures found almost incomprehensible. Every soldier carried one. Every soldier believed in it. Every soldier knew that ammunition was plentiful and replacement weapons were waiting. In the end, the M1 Carbine's true significance lay not in its ballistics or its design, but in what it represented. A nation that had chosen to fight not with the excellence of the few, but with the adequacy of the many. A nation that could field millions of soldiers carrying rifles of genuine military capability and still maintain overwhelming superiority in every other category of weaponry. A nation whose industrial system produced weapons the way previous empires produced bread, and distributed them to every soldier regardless of rank or position. The Japanese general who called the M1 Carbine a farmer's rifle had made an observation that captured a profound truth without understanding it. In the American system, every soldier was, in a sense, treated like a farmer, given adequate tools to accomplish the task, supplied with sufficient ammunition and resources, trusted to execute their mission without the elaborate hierarchies and restrictions of traditional military organization. The farmer's rifle was not a symbol of inadequacy. It was a symbol of something Japanese military culture could not comprehend. A democracy so confident in its abundance and its system that it could arm millions with adequate weapons and still win overwhelmingly. The M1 Carbine, in its 6 million unit production run, in its distribution across the Pacific Theater, in its placement in the hands of millions of American soldiers, represented a final judgment on two competing visions of warfare and society. One believed that warrior spirit and military discipline could overcome material disadvantage. The other believed that industrial capacity and democratic distribution of resources could build an overwhelming advantage so profound that no amount of warrior spirit could overcome it. The carbines kept firing, the supply lines kept flowing, the soldiers kept advancing, and American abundance, embodied in a simple rifle carried by millions, proved decisive in a way that no single battle or campaign could have been decisive. It was not victory in the traditional sense. It was the triumph of logistics over ideology, of distribution over hierarchy, of industrial democracy over military empire. As the war ended and American soldiers brought their carbines home, many of these weapons entered civilian life. They were common enough to be surplused, simple enough to be readily available, durable enough to function for decades. The M1 Carbine that had represented American abundance in the Pacific became a symbol of something else: the return of military capacity to civilian use, the integration of millions of armed, trained soldiers back into democratic society, the transformation of wartime industrial power into peacetime abundance. In this transition, the M1 Carbine carried its fundamental message. In America, even the simple rifle was available to millions. Even in peace, even in civilian life, the abundant material foundation that had won the war remained visible in the millions of surplus carbines that civilians could own and operate. The general who dismissed the M1 Carbine as a farmer's rifle was right in ways he did not expect. It was a rifle for ordinary soldiers, for support personnel, for anyone who might need a weapon. It was a rifle produced with such efficiency that it could be manufactured by the millions and still represent acceptable military capability. It was a rifle that embodied the principle that democratic societies could field not elite warriors, but armed millions, equipped with adequate technology and limitless ammunition. And that principle, embodied in 6 million carbines and distributed across the Pacific Theater, proved to be the most devastating weapon Japan ever faced, not in its technical specifications, not in its ballistic characteristics, but in what it represented: a nation and a system so confident in its abundance that it could arm everyone, supply everyone with ammunition, and trust that volume and distribution would achieve what no amount of individual skill or warrior spirit could overcome. The M1 Carbine fired its last rounds in the Pacific in August 1945, but the principle it embodied, that democratic societies fighting for survival would mobilize their entire industrial capacity, arm their entire populations with adequate weapons, and distribute those weapons with a generosity born from genuine material abundance, that principle remained. It remained in the rifles that came home with soldiers. It remained in the way American military doctrine evolved. It remained in the fundamental understanding that in the modern world, industrial capacity, not warrior spirit, determines the outcome of wars. And it remained in the M1 Carbine itself, 6 million rifles that asked no questions, that required no explanation, that simply embodied a single proposition. American abundance was infinite, and that abundance in the hands of millions would be used to defeat anyone who stood against it.